to go further into the latest details on the suspect who is now accused of assassinating Charlie Kirk. And joining me now to discuss this is Larry Taunton. He's the founder and executive director of Fixed Point Foundation. Larry, welcome back to Washington Watch. Thank you for joining us.
It's great to be with you.
Okay, first of all, we should note that this is certainly a developing story, and details continue to emerge even as we talk right now. So some of the details are not yet confirmed at this point, but there are some reports, Larry, that at least are suggesting that the shooter may have had some ties with Antifa. So as you have been looking into this, what have you found so far about this suspect?
Yeah, well, Jody, those details, as you point out, are still quite sketchy, but it is being reported from several sources at this point, again, very early in the investigation, that he did have links with Antifa, or Antifa, if you'd like to call it that, and that he had inscribed his bullets with so-called anti-fascist statements, you know, things like Bella Ciao being a famous song from the Spanish Civil War, 1939, that you know, the communists are going off to fight the fascists, and catch this fascist, and also putting on the shell casings the Antifa arrows, you know, that looks very much like the logo. And it seems that Discord, which I've been asking my own children about, you know, for the last couple of hours, Discord, which is a chat app, is one that he was involved in. And it seems that he was involved with groups that met there that were calling for the extermination of Christians.
Wow. Larry, how does a person get here? I mean, you look at this individual himself, a college student, but was on a prestigious academic scholarship. How in the world does a young person like this get involved in a group like that? What is the appeal that's drawing young people into this stuff?
Well, you know, as a former educator, you know, someone who taught both university and preparatory school, I have to tell you this: it's very rare that you encounter a hypocritical youth. They are painfully, almost painfully naive and sincere, and they're looking for something to believe in. They're looking for purpose. And as such, teachers, you know, have to be very careful in what you say to your students. You know, I'm mindful of the old Hitchcock movie, you know, starring Jimmy Stewart, where he plays a professor of criminology and just sort of throws out to his students, you know, if the perfect murder could be committed. And the next thing he knows, a couple of students have gone out and actually killed someone. You must be very careful with students that you are not, you know, throwing out crackpot ideas, because they're all too ready to put hands and feet to your ideas. And what we are seeing across the country, Jody, is we're seeing the radicalizing of America's youth. And it's being done very cynically. It's being done very deliberately. And that's because youth have always been the shock troops, the cannon fodder for every radical movement.
So the appeal is something bigger than themselves? Is that what it is?
Yes, I think so. Listen, I was speaking on a college campus just a couple of years ago, where I was speaking on a topic that I've been asked to speak on, which was the Declaration of Independence, and I was talking about the very radical idea that you know, this is actually Civics 101. I'm being sarcastic, that our inalienable rights, that they come from God. They don't come from government, and that's embedded in the Declaration of Independence. Well, the next thing I know, a professor stands up during my lecture. He says the lecture is over. He was offended by my reference to God, and he kept telling his students, don't listen to him, don't listen to him. And I just continued to plow on. This is what's happening in our universities. And so I think a lot of these kids, when they're told repeatedly, I mean, we see what happens to adults. We saw what happened to an entire country in Germany with propaganda. When kids are told repeatedly that someone is evil and we must do everything we can to stop them, when comparisons are made, New Republic, to Adolf Hitler, to Nazis, to fascists, a mass murder, these kinds of things, kids are ready to act. They are ready. They want to become the next Dietrich Bonhoeffer, you see, but they don't understand that Dietrich Bonhoeffer was motivated by something else and understood it in a very different way. Most of these kids don't even have any idea what fascist means. You know, my conversations with them reveal they just don't know that. They don't know what these words are. They just associate it with something evil, and that's because they're being wound up and directed towards these kinds of activities. And then Democrats sit back and pretend they don't know what's going on. And I want to be clear on this point, Jody. What Tyler Robinson did here is exactly what Democrats wanted him to do. The crocodile tears we're hearing are not genuine. They want these things to happen. They created the atmosphere for assassination in Butler, Pennsylvania, and they continue to create it. These are sleeper cells in a sense that they're creating and setting loose into the culture to do precisely what they are doing.
Wow. So you mentioned the messages that were left on the bullet casings. Interesting to me how frequently we see these little signs of motive left behind. What do you make of that?
Well, in part what I get from it is that they want what they're doing to be known and associated with a much larger cause. Listen, we saw how the left celebrated the murder of United Healthcare CEO shot down in cold blood in New York. We saw how they celebrated that. And we would be naive to think that there aren't plenty of directionless youth who aren't prepared to go out and do the same thing in order to get the same acclaim. You know, I'm reminded of something C.S. Lewis said in a little book that he wrote during World War II called The Abolition of Man, where everyone was saying we have to get rid of the potential Hitlers, you know, in our classrooms. And C.S. Lewis said no. He said, for every student with bad ideas, there are 3 with no ideas at all. So the task of the modern educator isn't to cut down jungles, is to irrigate intellectual deserts. And that's where we find ourselves. A lot of these kids, they have not been given a strong ideological basis. And the result is they're easy prey for propagandists when they come.
Wow. Very interesting. I mean, what you're laying out for us there is both a responsibility and a problem that we're seeing in so much of our educational institutions. You know, it's sometimes Christians ask me, believers, you know, what's the problem? And I say, look, we as believers are the problem, but we are the solution as well. And to some extent, that's what we could say with education right here. They're the problem, but they can be part of the solution as well. Larry, look, we're up against a break. I'd like for you to stick around if that's okay with you.
Yeah, I'd be delighted to, Jody.
Larry, thanks so much for sticking around over the break.
Delighted, Jody.
All right. Listen, we've been discussing the suspect who has now been apprehended for the assassination of Charlie Kirk. But before we continue on that track, Larry, I wanted you to share some of your thoughts on Charlie. You knew him. So from your relationship, tell us about Charlie Kirk.
Sure. I can't claim to have known Charlie real well, but I met him at Mar-a-Lago and had dinner with him a couple of years ago. And one of the things that immediately struck me about Charlie, other than the fact, I mean, I'm a pretty big guy and Charlie is a big guy. But I also, was struck by the fact that Charlie, what you saw with him off stage is exactly what he was on stage. He was driven by a sense of mission. He was highly energetic. He was a real thoughtful guy, friendly, and believed. He was very sincere in what he believed. And, I just love that about Charlie. I love the fact that Charlie was driven to make an impact for Jesus Christ in this culture. And that's something I really want to underscore here, because the media pundits want to recast him as some kind of quote unquote far right, political operative. Charlie's political beliefs were rooted in his Christian conviction. So it was his Christian conviction that determined his political beliefs, not the other way around. And that just made Charlie just a wonderful guy.
Well, and I know you, like the rest of us, have been just grieving. It was such a shock to get the word of this, and I've just been kind of numb, to be honest with you, throughout the week. I'm sure that's been a similar situation for you as well. But as we now have a suspect in custody, it's interesting that family members actually told investigators that the suspect had become more politically radicalized, like you were talking about before the break, and that he had spoken specifically about Charlie Kirk in the weeks leading up to this attack. Let's go back to our conversation before the break. And if you can just elaborate a little bit more, in your opinion, what is it that is radicalizing our youth these days?
Well, let's talk about the violence, of the left. I myself, along with, maybe about 15 other people, have been the target of their violence. There was an attempt to murder me and several others by proxy. My home was swatted in February of this year. My dog Ranger, a German Shepherd, alerts me to the fact that there are people outside my home, and I look out and I see armed men wearing body armor pointing AR-15s into my windows. Turned out there were 19 of them, all, as the FBI said, loaded for bear, with 30 more units on the way. Now, those guys didn't know that they had been set up. It was law enforcement that had been set up with bogus calls. But the point that I'm making here is that this isn't anomalous from the left. This is the way they operate. And they will continue to operate this way until there are severe consequences for these kinds of actions, until the cost-benefit ratio is flipped. And you see right now, it's all benefit for them because there has been no cost. There have been no arrests in my own swatting, the swatting of several others. There have not been any arrests, not been any consequences for that. So that has to change. But where the failure has taken place, in my opinion, as a longtime educator and dealing with so many youth over the course of my career, is that there has been, first of all, there's the breakdown of the family, which I know that the good people at Family Research Council are very aware of. But then you couple that with what's happening in our institutions of education, of higher learning, lower, where you have individuals who are coming into these places who are themselves radicals and who have the objective of radicalizing young people. So that my experience in going to college campuses and speaking, say 15, 20 years ago, they would maybe line up at the mics to take you on and try to put together, arguments. Maybe they weren't good arguments, but they were ready to engage with you, and they believed in free speech. These days, they just want to shut you down, or they just want to kill you. And that was, of course, what happened in the case of Charlie Kirk. But I do want to say this to those who are listening to us, Jody. We're winning.
I got another question for you. So,
yes, sir.
Go ahead.
Well, I just want to say...
right in along with what you're saying. Let me just ask you this, because I got you. We are winning, and I agree with you. But let me, to verify what you're saying, a recent poll indicated some 34% of college students believe that it's acceptable to use violence these days to silence someone like you're suggesting. And you go even further beyond that, over 55% of those on the left, identifying as left of center, over 55% of them believe that it would be justified to murder President Trump. I mean, so we have a an assassination culture, a death culture that is developing. Real quickly, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, some very clever people have put together a montage. Perhaps you have here on Washington Watch of people like Hillary Clinton and Chuck Schumer and Adam Schiff and Gavin Newsom and on and on and on, the usual suspects, all using the language of violence and all saying that we must do whatever it takes to stop the MAGA movement. And so, you know, young people aren't stupid. They hear that, they see that, and they think, okay, well, I'll be a hero if I go out and I assassinate this person or that person. And, you know, and we're hearing all this stuff, you know, now we need to calm down, you know, the rhetoric. We don't need to point fingers. To me, that would be like the Nazis post-World War II saying, gosh, let's be careful with the finger pointing here.
Yep. Larry Taunton, Executive Director of Fixed Point Foundation. Fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for joining us today on Washington Watch.
It's great to be with you, brother.